7. Before I begin, a couple things. Number one, I tried to trade classes with my wife this week so she could teach my lesson and I could teach hers. Hers was a lot more appealing to me. She said, "Nope, you're stuck." So here I am. Number two, I do not know, and I sat at my desk contemplating, I do not know if I have ever heard a lesson entirely on Melchizedek in my 60 years of being in church, in Bible college, and I don't know if I've ever heard one. Have you? So I thought, what have we done? Why have we overlooked this topic? It's actually 2 whole chapters, Hebrews chapter 7, Hebrews chapter 8. 2 whole chapters devoted to this individual. And we're going to learn a lot, I think. I will be up front and tell you this probably isn't going to be the most enthusiastic lesson that I've ever taught. It's going to be a lot of history. That has to be a part of it to explain, to give us the background of who he is. But there's a lot of doctrine here, essential doctrine to what we believe. So in light of that, we need to give some history, always, background, what is, or who is Hebrews written to? And this becomes extremely critical to this passage. So who is it written to primarily? Hebrews, second generation, first century Jewish Christians. Jewish Christians. That's essential. Okay? What is the, and we're going to see it portrayed through here a lot. What's the key word, the key thought to the whole book? Better. Better. As compared to something else. And we're going to see that over and over. Okay? And we've looked at instances that better covenant, better person. Okay? We're going to see that. So, keep that in mind. We're going to go back to that again and again. As the writer of Hebrews is writing to this first century Jewish Christian who is now under persecution, under duress, we could say, and wanting to revert back to Judaism, to their form of belief. Okay? Now we've looked at a lot of application, and there's application here today. It's not just history. We'll get to that. But they're contemplating, I'm going to go back to what I used to believe, what I was taught, what I grew up believing. Okay? And the writer of Hebrews is saying, no, there's a better way. And God, and this is the underlying theme through this whole 2 chapters, is God has provided this better way. Okay? So go to Hebrews chapter 7. Believe it or not, you probably won't. I want to cover the entire chapter. There you go. So look at that. That's 28 verses. That's a world record for me. And I haven't done it yet, so don't. But it's all basically one thought. And the reason I want to do it because it just fits better. I don't know if time-wise I'll do it, but we'll try. So, Melchizedek, it starts in verse 1. He actually starts in the last verse of chapter 6. He's actually mentioned in chapter 5. So let's test your knowledge. Where do we find Melchizedek in the Bible? Alive. He's not alive in Hebrews chapter 7.
He's the time of Abraham.
Time of Abraham, which is Genesis. Okay, now we're getting there. Chapter what? 14. I'll give you a hint. Chapter 14. Yeah, there you go. Chapter 14. Okay? And the background of the story is Abram. He's called Abram in chapter 14. Abram and Lot have separated. They've gone their separate ways. Where did Lot go? To Sodom. He took the well-watered plains of Sodom. And in the story in Genesis 14, there's 5 kings that form an alliance. They go against Sodom and Gomorrah and they defeat the cities. and they take captive everybody and take spoil of the cities. Well, there's a survivor, and I'm paraphrasing, but there's a survivor that makes his way to Abraham and tells him all that's happened. Now, Abraham is rich, he's powerful, he has a lot of possessions, but he also has, it says, 318 of his servants, and he arms them. Okay? And these probably were not just your typical servants. They were probably soldiers or background. They were fighting men. He arms them and they pursue after these kings that have taken Sodom captive. They overtake them, they defeat them in battle, and they get all the people and all the spoils. They recover it all. It's a great victory because certainly those 5 kings had an army of more than 318 people. God gives him the victory, and this is important. And on the way back, he passes by Salem, the city, which is what? Jerusalem. And Melchizedek comes out to meet him. So in chapter 7, verse 1, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem, okay, actual place, Jerusalem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. So Melchizedek comes out to Abraham and his returning party of soldiers, and he blesses him. And we're going to see that as we work our way through the chapter. To whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all. Just throw this out here. What's a 10th part? What do we call that? A tithe. Okay, very good. 10th part. Abraham gave a 10th part, a tithe, unto Melchizedek. Okay, I'm going to talk. Where was the tithe instituted in the Bible? Apart from this, Levitical law, right? So we need to keep in mind here, which came first? Abraham and Melchizedek, or the Levitical law? Abraham. How long before? Hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. So Abraham and Melchizedek precede Moses in the law and Aaron in the Levitical priesthood. That's where the tithe was instituted. But Abraham, under God's leading direction, pays, for lack of a better description, pays a tithe to Melchizedek. Okay? To whom also, verse 2, Abraham gave a 10th part of all. That was a parenthetical thought. So, back to Melchizedek. His name literally means, that's what it says, first being interpreted, king of righteousness, or your Bible might say king of justice. Literally in Hebrew, that's what the name Melchizedek means. King of righteousness, king of judgment. Justice. King of justice. Get that out there. And after that, also, king of Salem, which is king of peace. What's the word you've probably all heard, Hebrew word for peace? Shalom, Salem. Same root word, king of peace. Here's an important distinction. Melchizedek occupies 2 offices here. You see what they are? What's the first one that's mentioned? High priest unto the Most High God, and now he is what? A king. In Levitical law, very distinctly, priests are not to be kings. Now there are some priests, okay, so I should back up. In the Old Testament, 3 main offices. That was prophet, which does what? Prophet brings the word from God to the people, often predicated by the saying, thus saith the Lord. That's a prophet's job. What was a priest's job? Bring the people to God. He makes intercession from the people to God. Okay? And a king is a ruler. Now, if you go to 1 Samuel, this is still history. 1 Samuel, who's the high priest? No, he's a king. Eli. Eli. What happens to Eli? What is God? God judges Eli severely. Why? Because his sons did not follow after him. And God says, that's an end to Eli and his sons. They're not going to be priests before me on God. Okay? Samuel grew up, became very powerful. He's the prophet. In fact, there's recorded instances in the book of Samuel. Samuel traveling through the land, comes unto the city. People, oh no, he's coming. And the elders of the city go out to Samuel and say, come you in peace, or come you in judgment. They were terrified of Samuel because they knew he spoke for God. In 1 Samuel chapter 10, the elders of the nation of Israel come unto Samuel and say, we want a king. And what's Samuel's reaction? Yeah. He's mad at him. And what does God say to Samuel? Profoundly. Samuel, they haven't rejected you. They have rejected me. And God grants him that request. And the reason that the people wanted a king, partly in rejection to God, because Samuel's sons didn't follow after Samuel either. So they wanted this king. So there's a very distinction made between a king and a prophet and a priest. They didn't overlap. Okay? But here, in Melchizedek, and more importantly, in the future, but here in Melchizedek, we see he's a king of Salem, king of Jerusalem, king of justice. These are profoundly important descriptions as you take them forward, and he's a high priest unto the Most High God. Okay? Those are important, not just with Melchizedek, but as we look forward. Okay, now verse 3 is a tough verse. You read verse 3, hopefully you scratch your head and go, what's this saying? What's this meaning? Okay, it says, speaking of Melchizedek, without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. What's that say? What doesn't it say? I mean, I read that verse and I go, oh boy, oh boy. Okay? And I'll give you what I found. Looking up the words and reading multiple commentaries, without exception. And that's a huge point, because a lot of different commentaries give you lots of different opinions. Right, John? Up. So you get, without exception, they all said, these words mean without recorded genealogy. Why is that important? So this is a comparison again. How, we'll get real simple. Where did the priests in the Old Testament, where did they come from? Levi. How did you get that? You had to be born into that tribe. You had to have an established genealogical record. You couldn't just come up and say, oh, I'm a Levi, I want to be a priest. You had to have documentation. Your father had to be a Levite. Interestingly enough, a little tidbit here. The tribe of Levi was big. Were all of them priests? Think hard. No. Who were the priests? Sons of Aaron. Very important distinction. The priests were all part of the ministry of the temple. And John wants to talk about the tabernacle. There were certain parts of the Levites who did certain parts of the tabernacle. They set it up, they took it down. There were certain parts of the Levitical priesthood that ministered in the temple. But only, Aaronic or whatever, priests were the ones that ministered in the sacrifices. Very distinct genealogy. And God distinctly chose them to be that group. But here's Melchizedek. 400 or 500 years before Aaron, as a priest under the Most High God. How did he get there? He had no genealogy. It was not even in place. How did Melchizedek get to be a priest? God had to choose him for that job. Okay, that's important. Sometimes, and I looked, kind of a basic age-old argument. Can I prove that the Bible is true? I watched a couple YouTubes this week about people debating on the resurrection of Jesus. And they say, if you can prove to me that Jesus rose from the dead, then I'll believe it. And their whole basis of, they're skeptical by nature. And the guy that is the Christian viewpoint, he said, we all live by faith. No matter what you profess to believe or not to believe, there is certainly an element of faith. Okay? How did Melchizedek get to be a priest of the Most High God? God put him in that position. And you say, well, that's not a very good answer. Well, that's about as good an answer as I can give you. Okay? He appears on the scene in Genesis. He is mentioned, and we're going to go to Psalm 110. He's mentioned again in Psalm 110, and then you don't hear from him again until Hebrews. But he's an important position. And the whole thing really can be summed up in that last part of verse 3. He abideth a priest continually. Is he still a priest? Is that priesthood still in existence? Now that's a loaded question. Well, that's a good way to... We'll get to that. Yeah, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay? Now he's going to explain it to us. Give us some of the details to fill in these gaps. Verse 4. Now consider how great a man this was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave a tenth of all the spoils. Okay? He's not equal to Abraham. He occupies a position above Abraham. Now, if you're Jewish, how important is Abraham? Yeah. Without Abraham, they don't exist. But Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. And verily, they who are the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people. We've seen that Levitical law. According to the law. That is, of their brethren, though they came out of the loins of Abraham. So he said this took place all before Aaron, by whose descent is not counted from them that received tithes of Abraham, and blessed him that had the promises. Now verse 7. And without all contradiction, or without any basis for argument, the less is blessed of the better. Who blessed who in our story? Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Who occupies a higher position? Melchizedek. Okay, that's important. Okay, verse 8. And he's using all the, and some of these are descriptive just in reading. I don't need to explain all of them. And here men that die, the Levitical priesthood, receive tithes. But there he receiveth them, of whom it is witnessed that he liveth. As I may say so, Levi also, who received tithes, paid tithes in Abraham, for yet he was in the loins of his father Abraham when Melchizedek met him. So he's just establishing the basis of priority. Who's first? Melchizedek. Who's greater than Abraham? Melchizedek. He's just laying that foundational block. Now here's where it gets doctrinally, not that that's not doctrinally, that's more historical, but here's verse 11. Okay. If therefore perfection, what's perfection? We have to define some words. Who's perfect? Does You said mature, okay? Yeah, without blemish. Even in this reference, it means a little bit more than mature. It means to be in a right standing with God. And that's important. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, parenthetical thought, for under it the people received the law. And we're going to have to delve into this in some detail here. But what further need was there for another priest? Should it arise after the order of Melchizedek and not after the order of Aaron? So let's talk for a minute. What's the law? When we think of the Old Testament Mosaic law, what typically comes to mind? The Ten Commandments. Okay? There's a multitude of other laws. Somebody has counted them up smarter than me. It says there's like 613. What is the purpose of the law? Taskmaster, and to what else? To point us unto Christ. But even before then, what does it do? But you're on the right track for me.
It shows us that we aren't perfect.
It shows us that we're sinners. We've broken God's law. In Romans chapter 3, great verses. I'll read you a couple, then I'll go to Galatians. In Romans 3, what's the verse that always comes to mind?
23.
For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But he says a lot before he gets there. Okay. Verse 10, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none understand, there is none that seeks after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are altogether become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. You get the point? I hope. Their throat is an open sepulchre. With their tongues they have used deceit. The poison of asps or snakes is in their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace have they not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatsoever the law saith, it saith to them who are under the law, that every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall be no flesh justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Galatians chapter 3. Paul writes Romans and he writes Galatians. Same idea. that no man is justified by the law in the sight of God, it is evident, for the just shall live by faith. What was the purpose of the law? We just stated it. To show us that we're all sinners. We're all guilty. None of us can meet the conditions of the law. And even if you think or thought that you were so good that you could do that, if you go to Romans chapter 5, it says, wherefore as by one man sin entered the world, and death by sin, so that all have sinned. We as humans have all inherited a sinful nature that makes us guilty before God. Okay? The law clearly shows that. Now I have to make an interjection here, because it's bleak, right? A little picture that Paul just painted and what we're seeing here. It's bleak. We're all guilty. We're all sinners. We can't be justified before God. So how is an Old Testament person saved? By faith. Where does it say that? So if somebody ever asks you that, you go to Romans chapter 4. And in Romans chapter 4, Paul uses, guess who for an example? Abraham. And he goes through that and he says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. How was Abraham saved? If you look up, if you look up in the Greek, the word belief and faith come from the same root word. Okay? Same idea. Abraham had faith. Abraham believed. The Old Testament saint, with Abraham as our example, was saved by faith. Okay? The law clearly shows that all of us need to be saved because we're guilty. Verse 12, for the priesthood being changed from Aaron, Levi, to Melchizedek, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. So and John has said this before. Would you rather live under the law or under grace? Hopefully that's a no-brainer question. Under grace. Under the grace that God has provided. And he's going to see that as we go through here. But there has to be a change. But I want to make the point that the law had a specific purpose to point men to God. Okay? For he of whom these things are spoken pertaineth to another tribe, of which no man can attend at the altar. Here's the crux of the whole issue about Jesus. And the whole issue is there are people from Judaism, first century Judaism, that are saying Jesus cannot be a priest. Why? Because he's not of the tribe of Levi. And that's a huge issue for them, not so much for us, right? In fact, maybe you're going, I was going to say, what does it matter? It matters, we'll get to that. But I was, who cares? It really makes no difference. Well, there's some, if it wasn't of importance, it wouldn't be here. It's not just for these first century Jewish believers who are struggling. There's some great theological doctrine for us here. Okay? The law served a purpose, but we're under grace. It has to be changed. Jesus cannot minister at the altar. That was for the Aaronic priests, the descendants of Aaron. So here's what, for it is evident that out of the Lord, our Lord sprang out of Judah. He was of the tribe of Judah, of which tribe Moses spake nothing concerning the priesthood. They're not to be priests. And yet it is far more evident, for after the similitude, I have to think about that word, for after similitude of Melchizedek, there arises another priest, who is made not after the law of the carnal commandment. Carnal may be yeah, it means fleshly, but it's maybe not the best word to, because it wasn't a fleshly commandment, but it was made in genealogy. Okay, we talked about that. But after the power of an endless life. So when I asked the question earlier, loaded question, does the Melchizedek, the order of Melchizedek still exist? We'll get to that. For he testifieth, verse 17, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So put your finger there and go back to Psalm chapter 110. Psalm 110. The only other place in the Old Testament, outside of Genesis, where Melchizedek is referenced by name. And I know this is a little bit tedious. The 110th Psalm is a messianic psalm, and even a little bit more than that, is a millennial psalm. So in your eschatology, what's the millennium? What does the word millennium mean? 1,000 years. Okay? Is it a established, or, okay, what's another word for the millennium? Starts with a K. I-N. Kingdom. To have a kingdom, what do you have to have? A king. Who's going to be the king? Jesus. And where's the king? Where's the seat of his kingdom?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Are you seeing some parallels here? Who was that first mentioned king of Jerusalem? Melchizedek. Okay, you seeing the parallels. Psalm 110. The Lord spake unto my Lord. This isn't really a play on words. It's a play on words in the English Bible. But you will notice in the English The first Lord is all capital letters. Second Lord is capital L, small case. Two different words. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Kingdom. Okay? The Lord shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion and rule in the midst of thine enemies. If you go to Revelation chapter 20, it says, this king, by name, Jesus, shall rule what? With a rod of iron. Parallels. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power, in the beauty of thy holiness, from the womb of the morning, thou hast the dew of thy youth, everlasting kingdom. The Lord has sworn and will not repent. Here's the verse. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So we see in this psalm, messianic, dealing with the Messiah, who we know as Jesus, millennial, future reign. Jesus is both king and priest. The parallels are there, completely significant. The Lord at thy right hand shall strike through the kings in the days of his wrath. He shall judge among the heathen. He shall fill the places with dead bodies. He shall wound the heads of many over many countries. He shall drink of the brook in the way. Therefore he shall lift up his head. The millennial kingdom, Jesus rules and reigns, occupying two offices, priest and king, just as Melchizedek. Go back to Hebrews. That's where verse 17 comes from, a direct quote from Psalm 110, verse 4. Verse 18, for there is verily a disannulling of the commandment going before, for the weakness and the unprofitableness thereof. Okay, we'll come back to that. When we get to the end of the chapter, we'll see where that weakness is. Verse 19. For the law made nothing perfect. The law does not save a person. Obedience to the law does not make you justified in the eyes of God. But the bringing in of a, here's our word, better hope did, by which we draw nigh unto God. The law pointed us to God, but we have a better way now. And inasmuch as not without an oath he was made a priest. Who established the order of the priest? I can't say Melchizedekian very well. Who established that? God did. By his oath, by his promise. For those priests were made without an oath, but this with an oath by him that said unto him, the Lord swear and will not repent. Thou, Messiah, art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Here it is. By so much was Jesus made a surety of a better testament. Word could be covenant. Remember we studied a few weeks ago covenants. Conditional, unconditional. Covenant is a solemn promise that God makes. A conditional is therefore, if you obey, make it real simple, if you obey, I'll bless you. If you disobey, I will punish you. And an unconditional covenant, God says, like to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, I'll make your seed bountiful, I'll make a great nation of you. That is God's promise to Abraham. Abraham has nothing to do with it.
It's written in stone.
Yeah, you'd say it's written in stone, as we like to say. It's permanent. So we have a better covenant. And you can sum up this better covenant in one word. What is it? Jesus. Jesus is the better covenant. And you can say, well, how? Okay, let's keep going. And they truly were many priests, because they were not suffered to continue by reason of death. Interesting. I did not know this. studying this week about the priesthood. How old, maybe you're smarter than me, hopefully. That didn't sound very good. Anyway, not that I'm that smart, but I did read a lot this week. How old was a priest when he got to go and minister at the temple? 30. See, somebody's paying attention. 30. How long did they serve? Till they were 50. And then a new rotation came in. And a new rotation came in. They were always new priests. But what's it say? But this man, because he continueth forever, hath an unchangeable priesthood. Is that important? Jesus Christ remains a priest. He is that one making intercession for us sinners to God. Forever. Okay. Verse 25. You gotta love this verse. Wherefore he, Jesus, is able to save them to the uttermost. Could the Old Testament law save us? No. That's the whole point of what he's trying to get to these Jewish people. The law, the keeping of the law, impossible to begin with, but it never could save you. But Jesus Christ can and does, and saves you uttermost. We don't use that word often. Means completely. Saves you completely, to the fullest extent. That come to God by him. This is important, at least it is to me. Hopefully I can portray it. John chapter 6 says it too. Anybody that comes to Jesus, he's going to save. He's not going to turn his back and say, you're not worthy, or I don't want you. Or my blood, I didn't shed my blood for you. I had a discussion one time, and it was a hard pill. It was a hard discussion, because the guy was not a Christian, but he was genuinely interested. He was genuinely, with his whole heart, trying to understand this. And he used the illustration of his dad. And his dad had passed on. He said, you know, my dad was a good man. He worked hard. He provided for his family. He was honest. He paid his taxes. He worked hard. But he wasn't a Christian. He never went to church. He never had anything to do with it. And he said, so you're telling me, he said, you're telling me that my dad's in hell. I said, so what did we just read in the Bible? And anyway, he said, so you're telling me that a murderer, a bad man, a wicked man, who does all these terrible things to other people, can then turn his life over to God and get saved, as we say, and go to heaven. And my dad, as a good man who never did any of those things, will end up in hell. What do you say? So that's what the Bible says. I don't make the rules. I said, you know, and he liked sports. I said, you go to a football game. It was fall when we were at, and they play by the rules, right? Why do games have rules? So it's equal. If you didn't have rules in a game, what would happen? Who knows? There has to be rules. There has to be boundaries. It's maybe a poor illustration, but God makes the rules. We might not like them. Pastor John and I were next door roommates in college our senior year. In college, 40 years ago, you were, I'll use the word supposed to be in your own room after 10:30 at night, right? And John would say, got frozen Coke and fresh popcorn, come on down. So after things quieted down, I would sneak down to his room. And there were many times when we got caught, right? He didn't get in trouble because he's in his own room. I'm in his room. And they say, you got to leave. And I say, but I'm only halfway through my Coke. And I, believe it or not, I was pretty sarcastic and smart-mouthed. I'd say, do you know how to spell my name? I said, good. Give me my demerits and leave us alone until we're done. Some of these rules I didn't like, but I had to be willing to pay the price. But if God makes the rules and they're eternal, the price is huge. But Jesus saves all who come to him completely. That's huge doctrinal statement. That's God's plan. God chose Jesus to be that sacrifice. That was God's, Hebrews chapter 1 says, from the foundation of the world it was chosen. God's plan. After the order of Melchizedek, to be this priest. Saves to the uttermost that come unto God by him, seeing he ever liveth to make intercession for them. For such an high priest became us, for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens. A perfect, complete description of who Jesus is. And you have to, and he's setting us up for this. Verse 27. Who needeth not daily, as those Aaronic priests, to offer up sacrifice. So the descriptions given in 26 describes what? A perfect sacrifice. When you in the Old Testament came to that priest with a sacrifice, it had to be the best thing that you had, right? That spot, that lamb without spot, without blemish. Here's that description. Jesus Christ is that perfect sacrifice, holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, who needeth not daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifice. Here's importance. First, for his own sins. Do you catch that? As the priest entered in, the high priest, the priest, entered into the tabernacle to perform his sacrificial services, what did he first have to do? Sacrifice for his own sins. Huge important. Before he could make intercession for you, he had to first be right with God himself. That's hugely important. Sacrifice for his own sins, and then for the people's. Why is Jesus Christ so much better? For this he did once. And that thought's going to come back in chapter 8 and chapter 9. How many times did Jesus offer himself for sacrifice? Once. Once for the sins for all people. Which is a better priesthood? Is it clear here? The Melchizedek priesthood that Jesus Christ occupies, a high priest. I'm going to make it. For the law maketh men high priests, which have an infirmity. That's sin. The Levitical priesthood were all sinners. But the word of the oath, the promise that God made in Psalm 110, which was since the law, maketh the Son, who is consecrated, holy, set aside forevermore. Jesus Christ is a high priest after the order of Melchizedek by God's command and design. Why is Jesus Christ better? How many times did he have to offer himself? Just once. That one time, we're just past the Easter season, that one time on what we call Good Friday, when Jesus offered himself for the sins of the whole world, paid in full, our word, to the uttermost, the sins of the whole world. A priest's job is to make intercession for the sinners, us, to a holy God. We're going to see as we get to chapter 8 and chapter 9, without the shedding of blood, you know the verse? There is no remission of sins. He's going to explain that thought further. It's serious. Jesus Christ is a priest, high priest, after the order of Melchizedek forever. Melchizedek, and you know what a Christophany is? Theophany. Christophany is a pre-incarnate appearing of Jesus Christ in fleshly form. Did that happen in the Old Testament?
Yes.
Yes. Is Melchizedek a Christophany? Right answer. Maybe. I don't know. The description in chapter 7 here we had in verse 3, maybe. But he's certainly a picture of Jesus Christ who came later. He's a king of righteousness. Those names are just not random names thrown out there. They're completely descriptive of who Jesus Christ is as well. The king of righteousness, the king of justice, the king of peace. Melchizedek was certainly a picture of what was to come. And these people, Old Testament, first century, Jewish, Christians, and it's hard for us to imagine. I was studying how they're literally taking thousands of years of Jewish history and saying, I have to abandon that and turn my heart over to God. Now, that was huge for them. It's not so hard for us. But so what's the point? This is where I say, what does it really matter? Well, if it didn't matter, it wouldn't be here. Jesus Christ is who he claimed to be. Go back. I'm kind of trying to draw this together. When Jesus Christ was betrayed and arrested, tried, what was the crime for which the Sanhedrin convicted him of? Remember what it was? Blasphemy. And what did he say? I am the Son of God. And the high priest rent their clothes and pitched a fit, we'd like to say, said he speaks blasphemy. Jesus Christ is exactly who he said he is, who he claimed to be, the Son of God. The perfect sacrifice that God chose in eternity past to pay the price for sin. He'll save us to the uttermost. The law, as we tried, maybe somewhat inadequately, points us to God. But Jesus Christ brings us to God. He is that person who stands in the gap. That's literally what the word intercessor means. I'm on this side, and God's on this side, and I can't get there. But Jesus Christ bridges that gap. And he'll save us to the uttermost, completely. Foundational theology. Now, what do you know about Melchizedek? If someone will say, what do you know about that guy? What are you going to say?
He's a king of peace.
King of righteousness, king of justice, king of peace. He's a picture of Jesus Christ when Jesus Christ rules in the kingdom. He is going to be just as Melchizedek, or better than Melchizedek, as the king of righteousness, the king of justice, and the king of peace, and that high priest forever. Jesus is described, and I'm high priest, chapter 4. Seeing then that we have a great high priest that has passed into the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. Jesus Christ lives evermore to make intercession for us. That's what a priest's job is. Jesus can be our priest because of God's decree. Thou shalt be a priest to me after the order of Melchizedek. That's all I got to say. Hopefully, you understand a little bit. I don't even know if I understand it all. But it's important that we know that Jesus Christ is our high priest. All right, it's 10:10. I'd rather shut up. Let's pray and we'll be dismissed. Father,